Jai Hind everyone. I'm Vishal Gupta from Ajay Kumar Garg Engineering College, and today we are going to discuss this topic, various Government of India's Act before Indian independence. Actually, it is part of one of the subject named Constitution of India, Law and Engineering in 5th semester of all engineering branches. So we are going to discuss this topic today. Before starting this topic, actually here we are basically discussing about various acts which were made by Britishers for Indians. So we have divided the time period till which they basically rule in our country. So somewhere around till 1947 we know that they ruled on India, and they entered in India in 1600. So in this time period, what we saw that there was coming of the Britishers in our country, and they initially entered in India for doing business. They saw that India, it is one of the prosperous state of Asia, and Britishers found that it would be good for them to do business with Indians. So they used to import lots of spices from India, and they were also trying to sell their commodities in Indian market as well. But later on what happened, they realized that as India, it is one of the richest, one of the prosperous country of Asia, so why don't we start doing rule on this country? So with this intention, as we know that initially the East India Company, it came in our country. So what this company did, it was having power to have its own private army. So this East India Company, it brought its army in India, and it started attacking on Indian states and provinces, and slowly and steadily they basically captured the whole country, and from east to west and from north to south. And then we saw that there was beginning of this British rule, which we saw from 1765 to 1858. But till this time here, what was happened, that this East India Company, it was ruling. So when East India Company was ruling, then we saw that in 1857 a major problem was created for Britisher, and that was that Indians, they revolted against British rule, or they revolted against this East India Company. So at that time, when Britishers, when British Crown, when the ruler, they basically saw that Indians, they are revolting, they are not ready to listen to this East India Company. So British Crown, what it did, it ended the company's rule. And now what happened, that Indian continent, Indian colony, it came directly under control of British Crown. Then the major reason why this was happened, because the British Crown, it felt that it was because of the consequences of mean policies which were adopted and implemented by East India Company in India, due to which Indians revolted. Then from 1919 to 1947, we saw that introduction of self-government, in which up to some powers were given, up to some representation of Indians were took place in ruling or in governance of our country. And lastly, from 1947, we saw that Indian Independence Act, it came into existence, in which India was given independence. And Britishers, what they did, they basically permitted Indians to make their own constitution. So let's start with the very first act, that is the Government of India Act 1858. So the act, it transferred Government of India from the company to the British Crown, and India is henceforth to be governed by and in the name of Her Majesty. So now this is an important thing, that there was the ending of this ending of the ruling of British East India Company, and now India came directly in control of British Crown. Then all powers, they were in the hand of Her Majesty's Secretary of State. So this post was created in England and person appointed for this post, that person used to sit in London rather than in India, and that person was responsible to inform about day-to-day activities related to India to Her Majesty. And a parallel post, that is of Viceroy, it was created in India. Then the powers of the crown, they were transferred or to exercised by the Secretary of State for India, assisted by a council of 15 members. So not only this person, here 15 more people, they are basically we may say appointed, and that these 15 people, when they combine together, then they are forming a council. We may say that it is very much similar to our present cabinet structure, in which we see that people, they are appointed, they are given various portfolios so that they can they can utilize their expertise in those areas and help in forming policies. Then next is the essential features of the system introduced by this act. So the administration of the country was not only unitary but rigidly centralized, and the provincial government were mere agent of the government of India and had to function under the superintendence, direction and control of the governors general. So here what is going on, that though this act was formed, but it's still here the control, the 100% control, we may say, that was at the hand of Secretary of State, that was at the hand of Her Majesty, and this was the major thing. Secondly, it was highly centralized or rigidly centralized, so all important decisions, they were taken by top executives. So next is, there was no separation of function, and all the authorities for governance of India, civil and military, executive and legislative, was vested in the hand of Governor General of in Council. So again, what we are getting to see, that in every country we see that working or departments, they are divided, but here what we are seeing, that Governor General, he is the supreme body and he will take all decisions in these areas. So the control of the Secretary of State over the Indian administration was absolute, and the Secretary has superintendence, direction and control of all acts related to Government of India, and the entire machinery of administration was highly bureaucratic. Highly bureaucratic simply means that people who are appointed, the top executives one, they are having very high power, and the people who were basically elected one, they were not having so much power, and these people in this bureaucracy, what we are seeing, that the top executives, they were highly unconnected with the public opinion, what people wants and what these people were offering. There was a world of gap between them. Now the Councils Act 1861, so the act enlarged the Council of the Governor General for the purpose of making laws and regulations by the additions of not less than 6 and not more than 12 additional members, and half of these were to be non-official members. So here what we are getting to see, that now number of people who are appointed, they have been increased, but that shouldn't be more than 12, and there were 3 nominated people who were basically appointed by Viceroy. So King of Benares, Maharaja of Patiala and Sir Dinkar Rao, these 3 were the people. Then establishment of new legislative council for Bengal, Northwest frontier provinces and Punjab. So we know that India, it was a vast country having a very large area. So these states, these provinces, separate legislative councils were also set up for them. But again, the problem is that so many defects were present in this act, and it gave unlimited power to the Governor General rather than people. So in the present context, if we talk about democracy, like our country, so we people are having so many rights, but here what is going on, again the trend, the fashion is not changed. Again the power is at the hand of top executive, that is the Governor General. Now the next act, the Indian Councils Act 1892. So it increased the number of non-official members in the central and provincial council, but maintained the official majority in them. It increased the function of legislative council and gave the power of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. So up to some representation of Indian is given over here, but it's still what we are seeing, that still majority will be maintained by Britishers. And here secondly, the it increased the function of legislative council. One of the important thing is that during discussion of budget here, what happened, that these elected Indian representatives, they were given power to ask questions. Then next is the nomination of non-official members. So we know in the present context as well that we are having separate legislative council for center and state. Similarly over here, for the central legislative council level, the viceroy will appoint non-official members on the recommendation of the provincial legislative council. And at provincial level, the governor of that particular province will appoint on the recommendation of the district board, municipality, zamindar, universities and trade association. Then here what we are seeing, that up to some extent there was an introduction of election system, though it was partially introduced. So not every person was given right to give vote, but up to some extent some people, some influential people, some rich people, they were given right. Then it enlarged the functions of the council, and it is true that the act laid down the foundation of the representative government, but it also suffered from many defects, like the system of election was defective, the powers, they were highly limited, and number of non-official members, it was very small. Now the next act, that is Morley-Minto Reform and the Indian Council Act 1909. So the first attempt at introducing a representative and popular element was made by Morley-Minto reforms, known by names of the Secretary of State's Lord Morley and Viceroy Lord Minto, which implemented by the Indian Council Act 1909. So the Council Act 1909, it was an act of the British Parliament, and that introduced a few reforms in the Legislative Council and increased the involvement of Indians in the governance of British India, and it was more commonly called the Morley-Minto reforms after the Secretary of State for India John Morley and the Viceroy of India, the 4th Earl of Minto. Here, despite Queen Victoria's proclamation that Indians would be treated equally, equally simply means that they will be equally treated like Britishers, they will be given equal rights. But here what was happening, that what we saw, that British authorities, they were highly hesitant. They were not very much interested that Indians should be given equal rights or they should be treated equally. But then this was the major thing which due to which Indians, they were revolting, because on one side Queen Victoria, she is proclaiming something, and on the other side British authorities, they are not ready to implement what was basically expected from Queen Victoria's proclamation. Then Lord Curzon had carried out the partition of Bengal. This led to a massive uprising in Bengal. As a result, following this, the British authorities understood the need for some reforms in the governance of Indians. So actually after this division, what we saw, or this partition, here what we saw, that people of India, they revolting because this was divided, or this was basically partition was held because Britishers found that so many activities related to revolts, they were going on in Bengal, so it's better that we should divide it into two parts. So Indians, they were revolting, and then they basically realized that now they need to do some new things, they need to bring some reforms so that people of India's can be pacified. So here the Indian National Congress, it was also agitating for more reforms and self-governance of Indians. And the earlier Congress leaders were moderates, but now extremist leaders, they were on the rise and who believed in more aggressive methods. So here again what was happening, that some people after this decision of bringing some reforms, they got pacified, but on the other side some people, they were highly aggressive, they were still highly aggressive. Then Indian National Congress demanded home rule for the first time in 1906, and Gopal Krishna Gokhale, we know, one of the famous Indian freedom fighter, he met personally in England with Morley to inform that there is very much requirement in the reforms of the existing act. The next is the Shimla deputation. Again here what was happened, that in 1906 this Shimla deputation was held, and here a group of elite Muslims, they led to Aga Khan, met Lord Minto in 1906 and placed their demand for separate electorate for the Muslim. And this was, I think, the year in which we saw that Muslim League was formed, and they basically asked for a separate electorate, their separate representation in India. Then John Morley was a member of the Liberal government, and he wanted to make positive changes in India's governance, and by this act the size of Legislative Council, it was increased from 16 to 60, as well as provincial was considerably increased, and the power, they were also enlarged. So here initially what we saw, that the system was highly or rigidly centralized. So here some delegation of authorities was done. Then here in the major reforms at central level, number of members increased. Then for the Legislative Council, again number of members, they were increased, and in these three legislative councils as well, we saw that now 30 members they would be appointed. Here the elected members, they were indirectly elected, and local bodies elected an electoral college, and that would elect members of the provincial legislative council, and these members would in turn elect the members of the central legislative council. So this was a procedure, and the elected members, they were from the local bodies, the Chamber of Commerce, landlords, universities, traders, communities, and Muslims. So here what we are seeing, that not common man is given right to vote. Here the influential people, the important people only, they were given right that they can basically vote. So in the provincial council, non-official members, they were in the majority. However, since some of the non-official members were nominated, in total a non-elected majority was there. Indians were given membership to the Imperial Legislative Council for the first time, and it introduced separate electorate for the Muslims. So here again the separate electorate for Muslim, it was basically started, and this was basically the thing which we found, that communal rights which took place in future, that was one of the reason, because here basically Britishers, they realized that it's better that now they should implement characteristic policy, or we may say a divide and rule policy, and finally it started working over there through this separate representation. So the members could discuss the budget and move resolution. They could also discuss matters of public interest. They could also ask supplementary questions. So in the previous act, what we saw, that people of India, elected people, they were not having this right, that they could have asked a question on the answers given by executives, but now here they are given power to do counter question on them. Then no discussion on foreign policy or on relations with the princely states were permitted, and Lord Minto, he appointed Satyendra P. Sinha as the first Indian member of the Viceroy Executive Council, and 2 Indians, they were nominated to the Council of the Secretary of State for Indian Affairs. Now, next act, that is Government of India 1919 Act. So, the landmark report in constitutional development which led to enactment of the Government of India Act 1919. Here, the main features are that first is the declaration which promised for the responsible government to India, responsible government who would basically responsible towards Indian. Then next is the diarchy in the provinces. So there would be double rules, and its object was to train the native in the act of self-government. Then in the diarchy, basically the whole work, it was divided into two lists. The first is the reserved one and second is the transferred one. So up to in some areas, basically Indians were, or the elected people, they were given rights. In rest of the reserved areas, basically the crown is having power to make law. Then the central government, so it was responsible to British Parliament through the Secretary of State, and it has bicameral legislative, so upper house and lower house system. But again here what we are seeing, that voting rights that were given to very limited people. And if we talk about the structure, then again it is unitary structure. But here what we are seeing, that it required that the 3 of the 6 members, so the people who are elected over here, that out of 6, 3 members, they are from the basically Viceroy executive councils, and they have to be from Indian origin. Then it extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorates for Sikh, Indian Christian, Anglo-Indian and European. So earlier one, here we saw the separate representation for Muslim, and now this concept of communal representation, it is extended to other communities in India. It granted franchise or right to vote to a limited number of members on the basis of property, taxes paid and education. And here Public Service Commission for recruiting civil servants, that was also started. Now there is also separation of provincial budget from central budget. So earlier what used to happen, there was only one budget for the whole country, but now this is changed, and here separate budget for provinces, that was also made. Then creation of new office of High Commission for India in London, and transferred to him some of the functions performed by the Secretary of State for India, and it provided for the appointment of statutory commission to inquire into and report on its working after 10 years of its coming into force. So here what was happened, that when this particular act was implemented, so one major thing was also added, that after 10 years this act's working would be checked, that it was able to achieve the objectives which were set for them or not. Then next is the Simon Commission. So the Indian Statutory Commission, also known as Simon Commission, and it was a group of 7 members of Parliament under the chairmanship of Sir John Simon, and the commission arrived in British India in 1928 to study constitutional reforms in Britain's largest and most important possession. So we know that India, as it was having lots of money, it was having lots of gold, so many resources were present. So it used to be one of the major possession or very important colony for them. So one of its member was the future leader of the Labour Party, Clement Attlee, and who became committed to self-government for India, and it came to be known as the Simon Commission after its chairman, Sir John. If we talk about background of the Simon Commission, so here diarchy, it was introduced in India by the Government of India in 1919, which I told you. So the act also promised that a commission would be appointed after 10 years to review the working and progress made on the measures taken through the act. Then the Indian people and leaders wanted a reform of the diarchy form of government, because Indians, they didn't find that it is suitable for India, so it should be abolished. So this was one of the major demand from Indians. The Conservative Party led government in the UK feared a defeat at the hands of the Labour Party in the elections due, and so hastened the appointment of a commission in 1928, even though it was due only in 1929 as per the 1919 Act. So, that commission, it used to be formed in 1929, but here in actual this ruling party, it made it in 1928 because it was hesitant that there were chances that it couldn't win again. So the commission was composed entirely of British members, with not a single Indian member being included in it, and there was seen as an insult to Indians who were right in saying that their destiny could not be determined by a handful of British people. Actually, initially when this 1919 Act was implemented, so it was said that there would be equal representation of Indians in this commission, but here what happened, that not even a single Indian person is taken in this commission. So the Secretary of State for India, Lord Birkenhead, had berated Indians on account of their perceived inability to formulate a concrete scheme of reforms through consensus among all sections of the Indian political scene. Now the next act is Government of India Act 1935. So it provided for the establishment of All India Federation consisting of provinces and princely states as unit. Then the act divided the power between the center and state units in terms of three lists: federal, provincial and the concurrent list, and residuary powers they were given to the viceroy. So again, what is going on? Through this 1935 Act, there was a thing which came into existence, that was federation system. But here what we also saw that these princely states, they were not very much interested, because their powers that could have been basically diluted, which princely states never wanted. Secondly, the whole work, the power, they were basically divided through three lists. In the federal list, basically central government will take all the decision. In provinces were given right to make laws and policies, and in concurrent one, both center and state, they were given this power. And in the residuary powers, that suppose if there is any matter which is not included in any of these three lists, so at that time what happened, these matters will come under the control of viceroy, and then viceroy will make law. However, the federation never came into being, as the princely states did not join it, and it abolished diarchy in the province and introduced provincial autonomy in its place. So here I told you as well that Indians, they were demanding that this diarchy should be abolished. So here it was finally abolished, and the provinces were allowed to act as autonomous unit of administration in their defined sphere. And moreover, the act introduced responsible government in provinces, that is, the governor were required to act with the advice of ministers responsible to the provincial legislature. So earlier there was no responsible government, and governor was having comparatively more power, but now here what we saw, that responsible government is made, in which now this governor is basically bound to basically work on the aid and advices of the ministers. Now it provided for the adoption of diarchy at the center, and consequently the federal subjects, they were divided into reserve subjects and transport subjects. However, this provision of the act did not come into operation at all, and it further extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorate for depressed classes like scheduled caste, women and labor. Then it extended franchisee and about 10% of the total population got the voting rights, and it provided for the establishment of a Reserve Bank of India that was basically meant to control the currency and credit of the country, that how it would be controlled if there is no any official or formal body who is having power to control currency and credit or the loans. So it provided for the establishment of not only a federal public service commission but also a provincial public service commission and joint public service commission for 2 or more provinces. Ultimately, we need some people who are highly qualified, who are expert, and who would basically help in making policies. So not only at the central level but also at the state level, these public service commissions basically they were established. Then it provided for the establishment of a federal court or the Supreme Court, which was set up in 1937. Then Cripps Mission. So Cripps Mission came in 1942 and recognized the demand that constitution to be framed by an elected constituent assembly and India to be given a dominion status. So actually in this this proposal was actually rejected, though here Churchill, he wanted that Indians should support in Second World War to Britain, and that was this Cripps Mission was sent with this objective. But here what we saw, that India, it asked for complete or full independence rather than getting a dominion status. So due to which this particular Cripps Mission, it was rejected. Now in Cabinet Mission in 1946, so here the Cabinet Mission came into India on 4th March 1946, and it consisted of 3 members: Lord Pathetic Lawrence, Sir Stafford Cripps and Alexander. So here what was happened, that though this Britain, it won Second World War, but Churchill, he was defeated and Labour Party, it came into existence, and then it was a bit sympathetic towards India, and finally it gave permission that now India should be a free country or should get its independence. So this cabinet mission was set, and these 3 people, they came in India, and they basically told that the cabinet mission, it provided for an indirectly elected constituent assembly, and the assembly consisted of total 389 members, and from which 292 to be elected from provinces and 93 to be nominated from princely states and 4 to be nominated from chief common areas. Then next is the Indian Independence Act 1947. So the Indian Independence Act 1947 received the royal assent and entered into force on 18 July 1947, and this act put into action the Mountbatten Plan for the independence and partition of India. So if we talk about its background, so here it was an act of the British Parliament that partitioned India into 2 independent dominions of India and Pakistan. Actually what was happened, that Muslims, they were not ready to, they were basically asking for a separate state, and due to which Britishers, they found that it wouldn't be possible for them to make a single state. So Britishers basically gave permission that there would be 2 dominion, India and Pakistan, and the legislation, it was drafted by the Labour government of Clement Attlee, and it was based on the Mountbatten Plan or the 3rd June Plan, which was formulated after the leader of the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League agreed to the recommendation of the Viceroy Lord Mountbatten. So Mountbatten came to India with the specific task of seeing over the handing over of the authority of Indians, but the Indian National Congress and the League couldn't agree on the question of partition. And an initial plan, it was proposed by Mountbatten, known as the Dickey Bird Plan. Here, according to this plan, the province were to be declared independent and then allowed to join or not join the Constituent Assembly, and Nehru opposed this. and as it would, in his opinion, would lead to the country's balkanization. And then Mountbatten came up with the last plan known as the 3rd June plan, which was accepted by all parties, and the Indian National Congress, which was opposed to any partition of the country, finally accepted it. So as per the plan, India would be partitioned into two parts, India and Pakistan, and the constitution framed by the Constituent Assembly would not be applicable to the area which would go into Pakistan, and these provinces would then decide on a separate Constituent Assembly. The legislative assemblies of Punjab and Bengal voted for the partition, according to which these provinces were to be divided between the two dominion along religious lines, and the Assembly of Sindh was given the choice to join the Indian Constituent Assembly or not, and it decided to join Pakistan in the northwest frontier province, and Sylhet. A referendum was to be held which would decide the country they were to join. So that's all for this topic. Thank you for your patiently listening.